when you talk to HR about the over 10,000 veterans. That's the Tennessee hospital for their lack of handling the tools properly because they were not disinfecting them.
What happened was I went to HR. There was a lady that came down from Washington, D.C. Now, before she came down, we got an email on 9/10/2001, the day before 9/11, that we were going to start doing things differently. We were going to be going to training. When she came in after 9/11, shortly after 9/11, she had said, we're going to do an experiment. We're going to have people, half the people from sterilization and decontamination, where they process the instruments, we're going to take them out, 22 of them. We're going to take them out and put them in this new experiment that we're going to try. And that experiment is going to involve people purchasing orders, medical supplies for the vets, and restocking items on the shelf. So the minute that they did that, it made things worse because you had half the staff in Nashville being taken away from doing a very important job, which is sterilization and decontamination.
Right.
And put into this experiment, which was logistics and purchasing supplies and bringing them up to the clinics and that sort of thing. So that was after 9/11, and after we went to war, it started to get the experiment was failing miserably. So people were complaining about how bad the experiment was, and people wanted to know, when is this experiment going to end? So when I had seen that things were going very, very bad, I went to Human Resources because I seen that there was a train wreck on the way that our veterans were not going to be able to come back from because there was no oversight, especially at the Murfreesboro, Tennessee facility. From what I understood from supervisors, they said that there was only one person on site to decontaminate the endoscopes.
Oh.
So I went to HR and I said, we need to get a new job description. We need to get someone to oversee Murfreesboro and Nashville, but mostly because in Nashville we had plenty of people, but Murfreesboro didn't.
Right.
So the lady at Human Resources, she said, well, why don't you go ahead and write up the job description, with exactly what is needed. And so I said, I'd be more than happy to do that. I have a background in surgical technology. I lived in Connecticut most of my life, and I did my practicum at Yale University. And I was, voted most likely to succeed. I'm not giving myself props or anything. I'm just telling you
Right.
that my background is apt. That's what my passion was.
Sure.
Was making sure that people had the right instruments in the OR. That's what I went to school for. And that was back in, 1983. So once I wrote up the job description, that I was very happy that they were actually listening. I was in the Nashville VA and the Murfreesboro VA. I had more of a concern because they didn't have the people to oversee things. As a matter of fact, if that one person was out, they would have to pull someone from Nashville to go over to Murfreesboro.
Which that makes absolutely zero sense to me, because there is nowhere in a organization that actually is properly organized that if somebody is gone for the day, that they don't automatically have an alternate that's trained to be able to do the job as well.
Exactly.
Especially a government organization.
And especially our vets.
Sure. And especially, after the track record the VA has on where vets they died because the VA didn't have a person that was able to step in when another person had to go on emergency leave or they got sick.
Right. That's right.
It makes no sense, because if you make the mistake once, then you come up with a solution, because you should be held accountable if it happens again for not doing your job.
You got it.
So was the experiment them trying to see how it was going to work out where they split the staff? Was that their experiment?
Till this day, no one has actually exposed what the experiment is. I am a Christian, and I got into praying.
Sure.
Because I wanted to know what it was, and God always answers my prayers. So I prayed. I cried out one day, God, what is this experiment? And he said, you want to know? And I'm like, I was kind of scared. I'm like, yeah.
Right.
I go over to the computer and type in his name. So I typed in the name of the VA OGC, which is the Office of General Counsel. All right, so I typed in his name, and I also typed in the lady's name that said that there was going to be an experiment. She was the CLO, the Chief of Logistics Officer.
Okay.
And she became that after she said that there was going to be an experiment.
That's the one that came down from Washington?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I was freaked out when I first typed in the OGC's name because up came Navaref. So I'm like, what is this? You know, Nazref. I'm like, what the heck? So then right off the bat, it had said Navaref is a research organization, and it was passed around the same time. I think that Bush was going out and Clinton was coming in. And what they do is they do all these experiments for every single VA throughout the country, and it's attached to the VISNs. So a lot of people, they talk about the VA, why aren't we getting the care, this, that, and the other, you know, but when really they should be looking at the VISN.
Right.
Because the VISN is the research part. So they're doing research from your head to your eyes, to your nose, to your heart, to your bones, to your skin, you know, whatever it is, they're cut into certain regions. I'm not sure how many VISNs there are, but the United States is cut into, you know,
right.
VISNs. And that service network is where you should be getting your service. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And you're not. So I looked further, and it had said that there's like two different types of, under this Navaref thing, organization or foundation. It had said that there's two different boards you can be on. One is like the OGC, and then the other one is who like conducts the experiment. So I freaked out because remember God had told me you would show me. Well, there was the Chief LO's name, and I was like, what the heck? They're both under Navaref. So I knew that that's what they were, you know, that's what they were attached to. And I asked, I got my answer. So I'm not sure exactly what they were researching. It seems to me that it makes sense if they had said that they were going to go into divide people and put them into another new role to see how that went. That would make sense. The only thing is no one overseen the experiment. That's why I went to HR. HR ignored me. They told me to write the job description. They actually put the job description up, and everyone was like, oh, Lisa, you going to put in for it? You know? Because whenever there's a job, you have to put in for it.
Right.
It has to be posted. And then someone came to me, they're like, Lisa, they went in the next day. They took it down. I just like looked at them, and they were like, they took it down, and they put up that it has to be an RN. So I'm like, what? I'm a surgical technologist, you know? I'm a scrub nurse. I'm not an RN. So they try to boot me out completely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this lady came in, and I'm not, by no means will I ever be a racist, you know?
Sure.
I have two kids. I'm a black woman. My kids are biracial. So, make a long story short, getting back to the subject, they gave the job to another lady who was not a minority. I'm a minority. And she came to me and she had said, and remind you, this is the job description that I made.
Right.
She came to me and she said, my name is so-and-so, so-and-so. And her last name has hell in it.
Wow.
And then she says, my name is so-and-so, and then her first name, and then her last name has hell in it. And she said, blank hell. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
She says, I'm gonna be your new boss. And I was like, what the heck? I wrote the job description. They took it, and they didn't give it to me. Well, lo and behold, she was in Nashville. The job that I created was to have more oversight over Murfreesboro. Now, this was in 2005, okay? Right after that, I started getting retaliated against.
I want to touch on something real quick.
Uh-huh.
When they started their experiment, they were pulling people off of positions that were going to negatively impact how veterans were taken care of, right? Wasn't that leaving a deficit in certain things? Now, finding out exactly how bad the impact was going to be, because one, I'll tell you right now, especially, you know, we see it on social media where some whistleblowers, they get attacked. They constantly get attacked because people think, oh, well, they're looking for attention, they're looking for this. And I got to tell you, the only people that are actually going after whistleblowers are ones that are trying to cover for something else, because I've seen it myself where in the VA, somebody gets exposed for doing something that ultimately ended up killing veterans, and instead of being fired or brought to justice as far as with the court systems, the VA will take that person and move them secretly to another location, not impacting their pay, not impacting their title, or in the case of a couple where they did impact the title, they still remained in the same pay. So
yeah, that happened to like five or six of the people that They promoted them, or they gave them a lateral move.
See, that to me makes no sense, and just, it's like dealing with the mob. It truly is.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And they're getting away with it, and it's upsetting. So when they were doing this, hey, let's try this experiment, I'm going to guess that they did not canvass those that are in the know. In other words, if they had you write up the job description, then that means they knew you would have had valid input if they said, hey, what would you think the impact would be if we were to pull these people from this position, these people from this position, in order to run an experiment? Because I'm pretty sure you would have been throwing the flag up saying, hold up, if you do that, who's going to end up doing this job that we need because it's vital, because veterans can die because of a deficit in this position. So if they had you write the job description, they knew that you would have had valid input. So I'm going to guess they didn't ask you for your input on what the impact would be ultimately if they pulled people off of their positions to run an experiment.
Yeah, but when I went to HR, it was after the experiment had happened. I went there to try to stop what I seen our veterans going through.
Which was?
No oversight at all, and some really, really bad medical supplies that I seen that were coming in. Many recalls were coming in. Some of the medical supplies were so bad that it could initially either kill that veteran or really injure that veteran in some way, shape, or form.
Which is your background. Proper handling of surgical instruments, and the processes needed to ensure that they are sanitized the correct way and that the process was done properly.
And the products
Sure.
that come in. We don't only handle medical supplies. As a surgical technologist, we're trained in what comes in, what actually has to come into, like implants.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
So the implants, there were implants that were coming in. Some of them were recalled. Some of them were recalled that were constantly coming in. So I'm like, okay, who is overseeing this stuff where they're getting crappy implants? When I say crappy, I mean like heart implants.
Yeah.
Do you hear me? Heart implants being recalled.
That's horrible.
Yeah. Implants for drills if you have bad knees, that they would break off inside the veteran, so they weren't strong enough, so you would have to go in and take them out. There was skin, like if you have a burn or something or cancer, you have like little skin grafts.
Right.
Yeah, those were actually contaminated. And the eye drops that came in, that's kind of like what started my case with the eye drops when I had showed the Office of the General Counsel in the Attorney General's office when he got hold that there were contaminated eye drops that could have actually blinded or deeply infected the veterans that came in for eye surgery. So the retaliation went on for up until 2008. I had to get a psychologist actually because what was going on was so sick,
Sure.
at the VA.
And
I couldn't really talk to them with my family,
Right.
I did, but they didn't want to hear it,
Right.
They're like, well, just get happy again. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Because they don't understand
Right.
the impact that PTSD can have on you.
Sure.
So
Yeah, it's easier said than done.
Exactly. So I went to my psychologist and I got her in 2006. And in 2008, she asked me, Lisa, how's it going? I had an appointment before I went to work. And I just broke down. I was able to talk for like a couple years, and I just broke down and crying, sobbing like a baby. And I was like, I can't go back in that place. That place is too toxic. So she was like, oh my goodness, she was crying. And she put in, my FLMA paperwork for me to be on for a couple weeks. And then a couple weeks turned into months, and months into years, and the VA removed me. And even though my doctor had put in FLMA paperwork and my retirement disability, she wrote all the paperwork for retirement disability, the VA said I was AWOL.
Oh.
And they gave me all that time. And they refused to actually pay the doctor for a very long time. She's like, they're not paying me, Lisa. Eventually they did pay her after I think it was a year. But yeah, so now in 2008 I left the VA, and then I was approved for disability only after I told I had to tell my story. What's causing you with all those anxiety?
Right.
Disability advocate or doctor. And I told her what happened. I was approved. So now I have this case in federal court in Nashville, Nashville, Tennessee, that was filed in 2006, and it's still collecting dust. But mind you, if they only had listened to me in 2005, they would have never had, and if they had overseen, like I had asked them to with the job description, if they had only overseen Murfreesboro, then I could have saved 10,000 veterans from being exposed to the HIV, hepatitis B, or AIDS virus from endoscopes, colonoscopes that were not properly maintained, cleaned.
Which baffles me, because if you think about it, as a veteran, I go to the VA, and anything that they even, with a blood draw, I have to assume that the needle is coming out of a sterile package,
Right.
and they're going to take all the steps necessary to ensure that they minimize the risk of infection or
Right.
tainted items. These are
Exactly.
10,000 veterans.
10,000 veterans, and here they have me. They're trashing me. I'm like a piece of crap,
Right. Well, that's the quickest way for them to try to shut you up, of course, to make you look like the bad person and inept, or however they can spin the tale so it doesn't focus the light on them.
Well, how can they, I understand what you're saying exactly, because, 100%, but every day I wake up, I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone,
Sure.
Because they had said that a nurse had found the dirty colonoscopes, and that's how it was found. But mind you, let me tell you this too. Now, when I went to court, I went to court maybe 3 or 4 times. I went to court to tell the judge. I went before the judge. Now, there was only me, because I had an attorney, but once he's in the eye drops, contaminated eye drops, he got really, really scared, and they let him go, or he let himself go. I'm not sure how that happened, but at this particular point, I don't have an attorney. So in 2008, 2009, end of 2008, beginning of 2009, that's what I'm trying to say. I went before the judge. So there was me, myself, and I on one side, and there was the Office of General Counsel and the ADA, the Assistant District Attorney, on the other side. And there was the judge. So I told the judge about the experiment. I told him that there needs to be an emergency investigation. Now, this is what would happen before the instruments were found. I told him about NAVREV. He said, Ms. Black, the government has so many acronyms, I'm not really sure. I said, well, Your Honor, with all due respect, please listen to me. This is very important. Please hear my prayer. There needs to be an emergency investigation in the Murfreesboro facility, because there's vets that are being injured. Even now as we speak, Your Honor. Now, I know that the judge, I was told he's military retired or had a military background. So he just kind of listened to everything that I said. I said, it stands for National Association of Veterans Research and Education Foundation. I said, and the OGC, I pointed to him. The OGC right there, he did not oversee. He has not overseen our veterans, and they're being injured right now. So I ask you, please, Your Honor, to emergency investigation. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. He was just steadily writing things down. And I flew back home. Here I am home, and I don't watch TV. Holy Spirit says, turn the TV on. I'm like, I don't watch TV. He's like, turn the TV on. I turn the TV on, and there's Anderson Cooper saying, 10,000 veterans have to return to the VA in Murfreesboro, Tennessee to be tested for HIV, hepatitis B, and C. I was like, whoa. I just could not believe it. So, are you understanding? Are you following through?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Good to have one person that's able to follow through. So, when I was in the courtroom, once I got home, I went through, the Lord said, go ahead and remember everything that happened again, after I seen Anderson Cooper. And then, of course, everyone else got on the ride with what happened to our veterans. But when I got back, he's like, okay, does anything look different? And I'm looking at the judge. I'm looking at the OGC and the assistant DA myself. I'm like, no. He's like, look again. And I said, oh, my God, I see it. What he was trying to show me, which I did not see when I was there, was that, and I remember the judge had told me that there was not a guy. I just really didn't listen. But make a long story short, there was no bailiff in the room, and there was no court reporter.
Which is odd if it's an official court hearing or trial.
Yep, hearing.
Huh.
Now, I have a jury demand. I have a jury demand on my case, and I know I want to go through, and but they're trying to block the jury demand,
Sure.
because they say that I need to get permission from a doctor or psychologist that I can go through with the trial. Now, when I went doctor. She's a doctor saying that I don't need a doctor. She doesn't need a doctor. She needs someone. The court needs to appoint her representation. So then the judge sends back a letter. It's a civil case, not criminal case, and we can't appoint her, or we won't appoint her on representation.
Wow.
Yep.
So I wanna touch on the fact that the attorney representing the VA was part of that NAVREF, which is that research organization, and that is a conflict of interest. It's not the first time that the VA makes moves such as that, but the fact that you brought up that so many, over 10,000 veterans were possibly exposed, they don't, I mean, think about how life-changing that is. I mean, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of veterans who have to battle the VA every step of the way. Now, imagine, because that doesn't make one happy. I mean, personally, I get to the point where I have so much anxiety and stress and anger, aggravation, that I lose sleep, and it just makes for a very bad day, which can turn into a week, and then be told, oh, by the way, you could have been exposed to hepatitis A or B or C, HIV, and maybe even AIDS. So we need you to get in touch with us.
Well, letters were sent out to them, and there's still, I think it was like they claimed there's like 150, between 150 to 300, I think, that they were not able to find their addresses. Right. Which means they're probably homeless or something.
Right, which is a very real possibility. So I have the YouTube video from the Associated Press titled VA Officials Grilled Over Botched Colonoscopies, and I'm going to pause it at certain points because it's only a 2-minute 32-second video. However, this is the VA being able to spin to try to make the public believe, because as soon as it comes out on the news, the public's going to catch wind of it, and then that's the only time the public actually starts screaming and yelling about, wait, what is this? How is this happening to our veterans and the people working for the VA? Well, this happens constantly. It's just changed the subject line, you know, but until it gets presented, then nobody, it's the head in the sand thing. It doesn't concern me unless it's at my front door, and if I don't see it, then it doesn't concern me. So I'm going to play the beginning of this here, and once again, this is the VA officials that are speaking.
Since December 2008, 30 VA medical centers have reported to us that they have not been reprocessing the endoscopes they use.
And that was Dr. Duncan who's speaking right now.
Or the water flushing system used with the endoscope in accordance with the instructions of the manufacturer. We rigorously studied the circumstances at each site. We determined that for 4 VA medical centers, Murfreesboro in Tennessee, Augusta, Georgia, Mountain Home, Tennessee, and Miami, Florida, we needed to notify patients that there was a small chance that because of procedures they had undergone, they might be at risk of being infected with the viruses that cause hepatitis B or hepatitis C or the human immunodeficiency virus or HIV. Each of the 4 medical centers took prompt action to notify veterans who might have been infected. They offered them testing, counseling, and treatment if needed, and they made changes to their procedures to ensure that they were in compliance with the manufacturer's reprocessing instructions. As of June 8, 2009, VA has identified 10,617 veterans who have been exposed to the risk of infection. 10,608 of these veterans have been notified of this risk, and 10,189, or 96%, have responded to our notification. VA is conducting an intensive outreach effort to find the remaining 419 veterans, and we will leave no stone unturned.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there real quick. I want to point out the fact that they're trying to paint it as if they're out there walking the streets trying to find and locate these veterans, when in true reality is anytime the VA is going to do anything, they're usually going to send out a letter. And then, so you got to figure, now there's a 3-day delay before it gets to the veteran, and then the veteran will try to call the VA back, and usually we have to sit on hold for quite a long time, especially when you have 10,000 veterans trying to respond. So them trying to paint it out that they're not sleeping at night, that they're pounding the pavement trying to knock on doors and find where this veteran is, that's a bunch of garbage. It's them.
And we're the ones that aren't sleeping at night.
Right.
You had said you have trouble sleeping. You know, I have trouble sleeping. You have to take medicine. You know, you have anxiety. You know, it's just plain. It's abuse.
It is.
It's abuse for doing the right thing. We're being abused for caring for our veterans that have fought with their blood, sweat, and tears.
Right.
keep America safe.
Right. And
we're being fought for that, and that's crazy.
Exactly. And the VA uses stress tactics, because I've talked to a lot of veterans, and when I say, well, look, I deliberately started this podcast because I want veterans to be able to get their stories out the same way with the whistleblowers and the sexual assaults. And, I want these veterans to actually have a voice, because if we start and become organized, because the VA makes it a point to try to impede any sort of organization, because once that happens, then they have to listen and they have to answer to the problems. And the majority of the time when I tell veterans, look, it's one thing, look, we all have complaints, we all have gripes. However, if you're not willing to do something about it, and I don't mean you have to go march on Washington, you don't have to go beat down doors of your representative. What I mean is there's a minimal solution that can allow you that voice by just expressing your experience and the location, because what you say could help so many others by avoiding that location, avoiding the same problems you had. And the majority of these veterans will say, well, no, I don't want the VA to take away my disabilities.
Right.
So they already have the fear. And I've heard from the VA when they'll turn around and say, well, we can put you in for an increase, but you run the chance of it all being taken away. Well,
I've heard that too.
How is that even possible if I have it clearly documented in my medical records and I have the...
Retaliatory.
Yeah, absolutely. Put the fear into you that you're going to lose everything. And if you open your mouth, you run the chance of being targeted and abused. And, I've had fellow veterans and teammates that have turned to me and said, I see what they've done to you. I don't want to have anything to do with that. So that's why when the VA boasts that, veterans are committing suicide, but only 6 out of the 22 a day are actually seeking medical care. If the others were seeking VA medical care, then that number would be a lot less. It's them trying to spin it into well, it's not our fault situation, when the reality is majority of veterans who aren't seeking VA care because they're seeing what's happening to the other veterans. So they're like, you know what, I'll just rather pay my own insurance and go see a civilian doctor, because at least then I have a chance to live, So the VA has a way of spinning things to put the pressure on veterans so they won't speak out, they won't pursue anything for solutions, because they don't want to get targeted. So I'm going to finish the last of this. It's only less than a minute.
I'm doing so. Okay, let me say one more thing, though.
Sure.
Actually, 2 more things. When you were talking about the vid that they had, the hearing for the whistleblowers, that you had said that I need to check out the hearing.
Yep.
And you had said that you can hear the fear in their voice.
Yep.
That reminded me, I have a email that states from the Chief Logistics Office, her secretary, that we don't have to complete, the VA employees don't have to complete the No Fear Act, because we have to be checked off every year for, certain things that you did. So I have a letter that says you don't have to sign off on the No Fear Act because we're no longer afraid.
Wow.
That's coming from the Chief Logistics. That's coming from a chief's office.
These are people who have, in my opinion, have no morals or ethics, and I don't know how they sleep at night, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't know either.
As soon as I'm done with the playing the video, I want to touch on what they were doing to retaliate to you, because it starts falling into psychological operations where they start hitting at you mentally to try to get you to basically disappear, stop being a thorn in their side.
So the problem of reprocessing endoscopes is a safety issue, and our goal in all safety issues is 0 defects. That is the goal of all high reliability organizations, be it airlines, nuclear energy, and manufacturing, is to have a high reliability organization. And the goal is 0 defects. I'm unaware of any organization that has reached that, but that is our goal, and our veterans can rest assured that we will aggressively seek out problems, and when we find them, address them.
To punch onto that point that he was trying to push on everybody, is that they're trying to strive for 0 defect. And then he puts the caveat of, I don't know of any organization that has yet achieved that, but that's our pursuit. So what they're automatically doing is, laying the groundwork for, so we weren't successful, but no other organization is, so you shouldn't really have to hold us to trying to be perfect, and ending it with rest assured, veterans can be rest assured that if we find a problem, we're going to pursue it. Well, that's not exactly true, because when problems are found, the VA buries it, and they're really good at doing the, hey, look at my left hand while the right hand is punching you in the throat, and then telling you that you're crazy for thinking that. But that's a lot of my emotional drive of getting this information out there, is for them to realize that fear initially may keep people at bay, but eventually, when they get tired of constantly getting kicked while they're down after serving their country and serving in a role where they're actually, and I've met lots of VA workers who were just incredible people who were in it for the right reason, even though they knew it was a toxic environment. They still came to work every day because they felt it was their obligation to help veterans as much as they could. And I think that's commendable. It really is. So you turn this in, and all of a sudden now things start coming down on you with retaliation. What are some of the things that the VA was doing?
Well, once I got to HR and I told them that we needed more oversight, and they neglected to have that oversight in Murfreesboro, which was the main place, because they only had one person working in SPD, which is the department that does sterilizes and decontaminates and deals with the supplies. Once they hired the new person, then I was taking off all the emails. There was actually, like a group of OR people. I was the only one that had gone to schooling for it. But they took me off, and they replaced me with people that had not gone to school. And they took me off the OR team. So they took me off the OR team. They took me off the emails from the OR team. I was sent to other areas of the hospital to work. I was no longer included in meetings anymore that pertained to anything OR. So literally my job was taken away for what I had gone to school for. They actually started some little people were coming to me because, like I had said, I'm a woman of color, and I was replaced with someone that's not of color. So things started to get really tense because Nashville was mostly black and Murfreesboro was mostly white, So then we started hearing words like monkey and nigger. So I was like, oh, this is getting really, really bad in here. And then even they sent out bonuses. They get bonuses periodically. So the CLO, and the CLO, some of them got really big bonuses,
Right.
But she had started something new called, the one that said that there was going to be an experiment. She started another thing for her person that was over her. It was called Above the Clouds. And with Above the Clouds, you can put in for your own bonus for the first time, they said, which is, I didn't understand that. But I didn't get a bonus. I did get one bonus at one time, but it was before I put in my complaint. I was ostracized by everyone that I work with. No one wanted to talk with me anymore, whereas everyone came to me before.
Sure.
I was ostracized.
Yeah,
and,
they're real good at getting the word out to try to keep you isolated, make you feel like you have no place to turn, you have no more friends working around you, you're not being utilized for your talents.
Yeah, and they had said that my talent had nothing to do with my job.
Oh, yeah, of course. That makes absolutely no sense.
So I was isolated, like you had said. I was trying to think of the word. I was isolated, and to the point where I had to go to my doctor, my primary doctor, and I told him what was going on, and he had given me, because I eat pretty healthy,
Sure.
Always have, and so I told him I need something for when I'm working at the VA because things are getting kind of crazy over there. So he had put me on alprazolam, and I asked him, what is alprazolam, and will it make me droopy, and what is the lowest dose possible, and is there any way that I can tell that I'm taking anything if I do take the lowest possible dose? So he had said, I'm going to start in the lowest possible dose, and you won't be able to tell. It'll just take the edge off. So that worked really, really well up to a certain point, so then I had to go from the lowest dose to the next dose to the next dose.
Sure. I don't think people understand how much it can impact your health when all of a sudden you realize that you've been targeted, and it doesn't make sense to the human mind. Hey, I noticed something is happening that is wrong,
and it doesn't make sense to the
Yeah, no, it really doesn't. And when you start realizing, why am I being retaliated against for trying to do the right thing? Why is it not the other way around? Why aren't people jumping through hoops to try to stop this? And it shows you how deep that it comes to corruption, because the only way for somebody to get such fat bonuses, and some of these bonuses are up in the six figures, and you start looking at the track record of these people and you realize, wow, they've been a director at 2 other facilities until they got caught. You know, all these veterans died because of their ineptitude, their decisions that they made, which were poor, and so on and so forth. But instead of being fired, the VA tends to want to retire when they get wind that there's problems and that possible lawsuits are coming up. They had a VA lawyer that was on retainer, that he started his own nonprofit, that he was keeping all the money. I think out of all the hundreds of thousands of dollars, he spent maybe 2,000 of it and on veterans, and he got exposed. And instead of the VA holding him accountable, the VA within a week was in the headlines showing that they're retiring this lawyer, and there was Secretary McDonald shaking his hand and thanking him for his service. So and nobody batted an eye. Nobody batted an eye. People.
So pain. It's very pain. People don't understand the pain that you and I feel because we have a heart.
Sure, exactly. And that's what I've had to run through my brain on many occasions is, at what point does somebody give up actually caring about what's being done? I mean, I personally won't be part of something that I know is ultimately going to hurt somebody, you know, because I know that that's wrong. But people need to realize that this starts to weigh on you and starts to affect your health. And you were hospitalized twice because of this, right? Because of all of this?
Yeah. I was just about, you must be reading my mind. Yeah, I was hospitalized. I was on my way to my doctor to get a refill, and I was thinking about the VA and why the heck I might have to go through this, and my heart just went crazy. So I was like, and thank God when it went crazy, I was right at where the intersection was where I can get on the highway.
Wow.
So, so I immediately took the loop, you know, to get on the highway, and I got to the hospital and went to the front desk and like, oh, what's the matter? And I'm like, my heart's going crazy, and I've never done that before. And so I went to go sit down, and they're like, oh no, come in right away. So they brought me into their little triage area, and my heart was going crazy. There's PVCs, regular heartbeat. They had to call doctors in to the emergency room, and so I was hospitalized to watch out for my heart. And they did tests and everything. There was nothing wrong with the physical heart itself. So they said it was just, I told them everything I was going through with the VA, and they said it was just anxiety. So they told me to, you know, and wait. And the most important thing is, after the person that gave me the alprazolam, which was my doctor, once I went to the emergency room and I told them who my doctor was, and they asked who my doctor was, she had like dropped me shortly after. So
shows you the far reach.
I'm now on, I'm embarrassed to say, but I thank God that at least there's something. I'm now on Medicaid, you know, after working almost 18 years, very close to my retirement.
Right.
You know, now I'm on Medicaid and food stamps, you know, so it's kind of crazy. And I want this one very important thing that I didn't tell you. The hospital, and the second hospitalization was because I was thinking about the VA, and for some reason I ate really fast. I guess I was in the middle of an anxiety attack or something, and I was eating at the same time. Well, lo and behold, my stomach just went crazy, and I was like, "What the heck?" Right. I guess I must have ate too fast, so I had to go to the emergency room. I was hospitalized for 5 days.
Just so people out there understand that, you know, a lot of people are like, "Oh, you just had a panic attack." You know, having a flood of anxiety because you're trying to make sense of all the attacks that are seemingly happening 360 degrees around you with no relief. Like, you don't have a coworker you could turn to that has your back because they've had the fear put into them on, you know, you're going to lose your job if you take sides with her, or you're going to go somewhere else and be totally different job that you're going to hate if you decide you want to jump on that bandwagon. Call it a panic attack, call it an anxiety attack. I don't care what you call it, but it is a very real thing when you sit there and realize that you are fighting against an enemy that you can't identify. You just know that it's a huge enemy that tends to win because they have the numbers and the power behind them, enough to the point where it affects your heart. And those that have anxiety, when you start having physical issues, your anxiety is not going to become less. It's going to become more, because now you're wondering how much worse it's going to be on you. And it just compiles and compiles and compiles. And people don't understand that there are so many out there that have the weight of the world on their shoulders and will keep it to themselves. And like you were saying earlier, you know, my family's like, why can't you just be happy again? You know, let's just smile and be happy. Most of the time we walk around and we look like we're happy and having a good day, when inside we're trying to weather the storm. It's so much easier to have an outward appearance that nothing's
raining for a long time. The sun hasn't come out for us.
Right. But if we were to look that way every day, people would, hey, what's wrong? You doing okay? What's the matter? I'm concerned about you. So what do? We put on a mask so that way nobody asks those questions. I mean, I have to do that with my daily pain because, you know, I don't want to have to re-explain what the problems are, you know, and there's not going to be a day that goes by that I'm not going to have pain. That's the reality of my accidents. You know, it's just, that's what life is. But I can get around having to identify that every time when, I mean, on some days, you know, I have a very noticeable limp just because the pain is that bad and I'm pinching nerves or what have you, that I can't avoid it. So people are like, wow, you must really be hurting today. It is what it is. And then I blow it off and move subjects. So that way we don't sit there and have to keep dwelling on that. So it's a way for me to avoid. Yeah, absolutely. It's a way to avoid having to basically put my pain onto others. And people need to realize that's a very real thing. And this is why, you know, some people, oh, I'm so surprised. I had no idea that so-and-so was hurting. Well, you know, because we try to keep it internal until we can make sense of it and then figure out what best ways we can take in order to get through it. It doesn't help when we try to do the right thing. And I've noticed that a lot when dealing with the VA. You know, I try to do the right processes, I try to put in the right paperwork, and I try not to cause hate and discontent. And where does that get me? It gets me immediately denied for my ratings. It gets delay tactics put in. It gets me sent to physicians who aren't specialists just so the VA can get the write-up they're looking for. And I start identifying all these little things. And what the VA doesn't understand is eventually, well, as I said earlier, is once you keep kicking me, eventually I'm going to start learning your tactics to figure out the best way to get you to stop kicking me. And I use that information to help veterans avoid being kicked at all. So they may think they're winning with abusing me, but overall they're losing because each time they try a different tactic on me, I'm able to get that word out to thousands of other veterans so they can avoid it themselves. And then hopefully that'll spread the word there. I'm hoping with all of these interviews that I'm trying to do and all the people that I'm going to be talking to and putting it on.
Yeah, I'm so proud of you.
I appreciate that so much. I'm proud of you because believe it or not, I have so many veterans that are, you know, they have stories to tell, but they're so fearful of retaliation and the bad things that could happen because the VAs drill that into their head that they don't necessarily want to step up and have their story recorded. And you know, that's fine. I'm not going to beat them down for that. If every veteran who was going through hard times said to themselves, if I told my story, would that help other veterans? If the answer is yes, you should feel a little twinge of responsibility to be able to get that information out. And you can be anonymous. You can get your story out without specifics, so the VA is not going to be able to quickly come after you. And if they did, you now have proof that they definitely have you targeted. I know they've got my name and number, and I'm okay with that because everything that they do, I record, I calculate, and I make sure that everything is timelined and it shows. It's ironic their timing when I put in this paperwork, and next thing you know, now I find I get denials for these two things, and I get this and I get this, and all of a sudden my profile on their e-benefits changed, and so on and so forth. They don't realize that people are taking notice. People are keeping good notes and starting to get more organized, and
2020.
Absolutely. And if we don't do that, then we're going to just keep repeating the same pattern of.
We can't afford to.
Oh, we really can't.
It has to come through with 2020.
Absolutely.
It has to come through now.
Yep. And the veteran knows that, or not the veteran, the VA knows that they outlive so many veterans. And they, I just picture them high-fiving themselves in the big office of, well, we just lost another 15,000 veterans because, we delayed rating their disabilities. And it's a sad thought to have. But if they weren't so damaged, if they weren't so poor in the support realm for veterans, then they'd be praised. Instead, they praise themselves on social media. They praise on the, hey, look what we did. We just did this for you guys, and you should feel grateful. Yeah. And hey, look at this. And this isn't to say that some parts of the VA is not doing good things, because they are. There's some,
they are.
Like I said,
there's some good ones there.
Absolutely. And I've had people on the phone tell me, it frustrates me so much because I hear these stories and then they'll give me good to knows. Like they'll give me vital information I didn't have before and to help me in my pursuit to get my case resolved. And it's sad that they have to.
I have a good feeling about your case.
It's going on 14 years now, and they change tactics, and it gets to the point where I start looking forward to identifying their new tactics, because that's just something else that I can use to help other veterans avoid. I follow a lot of politicians on social media, and watching them high-five each other through tweets and praising each other on tweets about this, that, and the other thing, but then start looking at what actions they've taken and see how delayed it is, it's sickening. So ultimately, I'm going to start getting politicians to commit to what they're doing and hold them to that and get them recorded, because once it's on recording, they're not going to be able to back away from that. And I'm still going to be trying to get a committee hearing where I can sit down in front of them and actually present them all of the proof, because then it's on record. Then they have no choice but to do something about it, because it's apparent that the secretary doesn't want to sit down and talk to me, and the VAOIG is not going to do anything about it because I've sent them more than one inquiry and they just seem to ignore me now. The same thing when I sent the White House. Hey, here's what's going on. I've got 13 years of proof, so on and so forth. And all they sent back was, hey, we sent this to the VAOIG, and the OIG sends me back a letter that did not touch on any of my concerns at all. It didn't even, there's no way you could read their reply and read what I sent and connect the dots.
Yeah, they did the same thing to me, and I find it so odd that you and I both have the same amount of years. That's just,
right.
To me, that's definitely another God moment. But
sure.
one of the main things that you had said, and this is, I guess, something in the PTSD, didn't want to go there, but when you had asked me about the experiment, and she had said that there was going to be training,
Yep.
Well, the training, I think I have in the email, for the 40 hours, 1 week of training, and then she had said, oh, you did a really good job. She was in on it, in the meeting, and so was her, assistant chief logistic officer. I guess you could say that.
Right.
She, at the end of the training, she gave out these certificates of U.S. contracting officers available, up to $25,000 that you can buy things with.
Right.
So 22 people got, not 22 cards, but the average amount was around between 4 and 7 cards each. Now, mind you, what I find fascinating about this whole experiment that was done, when we did order the supplies and they had given out these certificates after this training, it was never reflected in our PD, the contracting officer.
Wow. We
were still the medical supply technicians, the same thing that we were before the lady even came down from Washington. And just the fact that all this email came before 9/11, the day before 9/11,
yeah, that's odd.
It's just bogus.
That is odd timing at best. I'm a firm believer that things happen for a reason. And
yeah, me too.
When you start spreading the information out and start putting it together, certain things will start standing out,
Yeah.
It's just, it doesn't give me a warm and fuzzy, that's for sure. And the mere fact that...
Well, they don't give us warm and fuzzies either, so the only way, it should give you warm and fuzzy. It should make you really, really warm and fuzzy. Because the only way that they're going to stop and do what they're supposed to do is for the people to find out. Because we're paying their taxes, we're paying their bonuses.
Sure.
And we should be paying the vets to get the proper care that they need.
Sure. Oh, I agree.
You expose them, I want them to not get a warm and fuzzy feeling. I want them to not high five.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely am with you on that one.
They make me sick.
They do. And, how do you...
Literally.
Continue on when every turn they're still trying to, oh, well, she wasn't doing her job. But nobody knows that their first retaliation is taking you out of your profession.
Right.
Now you're working somewhere that's not what you were trained to do. And then all of a sudden...
I was able to work on all of it. That's why they hired me to do the OR. They knew that I had the background to do any kind of medical supply. Because I trained our enlisted personnel to become scrub nurses even before I came to the VA for the Navy.
Right.
I worked active duty, so they knew that I had the background more so than anyone else. But they took me out of, I understand what you're saying, they took me out of the OR and people that didn't have any school, and they just had me go to like ENT clinic.
Right. And trying to convince you that...
respiratory clinic, that sort of thing.
And trying to convince you that anybody could do anybody else's job.
Yeah, that's what she had literally said.
Which...
CLO, I asked, can anyone do anyone else's job this experiment? Because my background's the operating room. Oh, yes, that's the beauty of it. Pretty sure that's what she had said. I was like, that's when I knew we were in trouble.
Sure. And you start seeing all the little things that they start putting in. Part of the retaliation that they were doing against you was after taking you off of the team and then removing you off of the email. So now you had no idea what was going on, and then putting more other work on you than anyone else.
Yeah,
and then
That's right.
The exit door to your office was locked, which is a violation of OSHA. But these aren't just happenstance. And then they install a loud bell.
Oh, I meant to send you the loud bell. I have a YouTube video that I have of the loud bell. It gives me PTSD whenever I hear it. But I meant to send it to you today. It's just, you just press the YouTube. At least you can hear the bell. And I mean, all the people in the VA in Nashville jumped to get the supply.
See, that just gets you to the point where you have so much anxiety because of what they've embedded into you. Trying to do the whole Pavlov's dog to you where they ring a bell and automatically you go running,
Yeah, that's it.
And I know from being facility manager, I was also the safety liaison officer, but it was a journeyman certification. So there was many hours of, safety training and all this stuff. So knowing, because my facility had to deal with firearms, knowing the decibel levels and what protection is going to be needed because of decibel levels and so on and so forth, because, you cannot violate OSHA regulation or you're going to get fined if you're a civilian contractor, which I was working for a company that was contracted. So that made me basically a civilian contractor, but the company would have been fined had my decibel level been above a certain amount in order for, the requirement to be single or double hearing protection. So the mere fact that the VA was willing to install a very loud bell, if it hurt your ears, then that means the decibel level was entirely too loud. And they knew this. It's just yet another tactic to get you to the point where you just say, you know what, it's just easier to walk away and start my life somewhere else than it is to deal with any more of this abuse. And because they know you're not going to go out and brag about being the pawn of their abuse. You're gonna keep it to yourself. You're gonna just try to pick up and just actually start to enjoy life again, because the VA knows that you are not going to get organized, because that's the natural thought with the VA is we can independently abuse these veterans and they're not going to get organized, which also brings to the point, about veteran service organizations and why aren't they beating down the doors of the politicians.
I'm so upset with them.
I got to the point, honestly, because I was actually a commander I'm a life member at one of these organizations, and I was a commander for a couple years, and I started seeing things for what they were. I mean, I started handling my own case years ago once I realized that the VSO I was using had no time. Like, they were just like, okay, what's your top 2 complaints? Like, well, actually, I got 5 things we need to discuss. No, I don't have time for that. You got 5 minutes to give me your top 5 or top 2. I was like, you know what? I'll tell you what. Let me open your schedule up for you. This will be the last time you ever have to talk to me. Sorry I wasted your time. And I turned.
Wow.
And I remember every time I went there to talk to these people.
I'm so freaking sorry.
It was disgusting, because these Vietnam vets would be sitting right next to me. And every time, and I wouldn't be there often, but it seemed every time I've been there, I would see the same faces. And I had gotten there early one time, and I started up a conversation with a couple of them. I'm like, I don't have a really good memory anymore. I've had traumatic brain injuries. So sorry if I'm wrong, but I swear I've seen you here before each time I've come here. And they're like, yeah, I'm here almost every single day. I'm like, how do you live your life? I mean, these guys were just hurting. They're like, we have to keep coming here in an attempt to try to get coverage. And these are Vietnam veterans. And, you know, if you're keeping an eye on headlines, they just came out and said, you know, the Blue Water bill is being passed, and the Agent Orange bill is being passed, and these are things that should have been passed decades ago, but are now a priority. Why? Because we lost almost all of our Vietnam vets. And what's next? Does that mean that, you know, the Gulf War vets, we're gonna have to wait until we're 70, 75 years old before the politicians do anything or say they're gonna do anything? That aggravated me, and it got me to the point where I was just like,
I guess so.
you know,
It should have aggravated you.
why can't, you know, I'm very proactive about my own things, and I see all these victims because they're like, well, you know, I'm using this VSO or that VSO, and some people will like, oh, I'll never go to that VSO, that organization ever again because, you know, they were horrible. And I try to tell them, look, it's not the organization as a whole as far as being horrific. You might have had somebody, a representative that was, you know, not motivated or just didn't care to do his job right, whatever. So there are good people in these organizations, but the way I look at it is, if you are a veteran service organizations and you're receiving a salary, which at the national level they are receiving a salary, then they should be beating down the doors and taking no prisoners, instead of going and doing a annual hearing in front of the committee that's on record and being fed softball questions and giving politically correct answers. No, there should be nothing but, you know, tables being pounded on by their fists saying this needs to change now, but we don't see that.
Because the VA controls them.
Exactly. That you can see from the questions and answers when there should have been a little bit more emphasis, there should have been a little bit more stress on certain questions, and yet there wasn't. So I find
little demon placed in there to try to make it, and the thing that hurts the most is that these guys are veterans.
Right, exactly.
You know?
These are the ones that have the position.
I can't comprehend it.
No, neither can I. And that's why I finally was like, you know what else can I do? Because secretly I've been helping veterans anyway. And I've had a very high success rate in consulting. That's what I call it, is consulting. I've had a pretty high success, and I've helped over 100 veterans avoid experiencing what I experienced. And then I remember reading something that says, you know, you can't do this or that for the veterans unless you're an agent. So I started looking into, well, how do I become an agent? So I started looking into it. Hey, put in this paperwork. You can be an independent agent. If you're a lawyer, you can do this. If you're part of the veteran service organizations, you can do this. And then there was, you can be an independent agent. You just have to do your annual training, same way you would do in your profession, where, you know, as long as you're showing continuing education credits. So there are classes you should be taking every year to keep up with certain information. So I put in my application, and in true VA fashion, because my name's flagged, but in true VA fashion, a couple months after I put in the application, I receive an email saying, we need you to call this number because whoever scanned in your information scanned it in improperly. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe they left out a page. I don't know. So I called them, and they said, yeah, whoever scanned your application scanned it as in a manner that left your signature out. So instead of somebody scanning it, and I've yet to find anybody, when you tell them, hey, I need you to scan this piece of paper, there's nobody I know of that would ever put it in vertically instead of horizontally. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So somebody lifted the lid, put it in vertically, so half of it was sticking out from under the lid, and then hit copy in order to upload it. So I said, well, let me ask you this, since I got you on the phone, does that restart the 12 months? And she's like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, because, you know, I did everything according to the numbers that you have on the website, and, you know, it takes you up to 12 months to process. She goes, no, it takes up to 24 months to process. I said, hold up. I said, I screen captured the information to make sure that I have my ducks in a row if I'm ever questioned on no, you have the wrong information. Well, I got my information straight from your site, and it says 12 months. But aside from that, let me ask you, does my counter restart? And she said, what do you mean by restart? I said, well, if I fill this out again and sign it and I send it to you, are you going to restart your 12-month counter once you receive this second signed copy? She goes, no, we've already started processing it, so your counter has already started. I said, oh, okay, well, that's good to know. The way they do it is, as soon as they're done processing it and they check your references is, then they give you the thumbs up, and then you set up a test. So you got to go take the test and you got to pass it. And I haven't heard word one for months, and I'm still waiting on word. And I kind of have a feeling that they're trying to figure out the best way possible to deny me even taking the test. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out, because I hope I'm wrong. I truly do. I hope I'm wrong, because I'm going to be pursuing getting that independent agent status, so that way I would be able to legally represent the veterans if they get brought to a board, if they get brought to a hearing. I can be right next to them representing them, not as an attorney, but as somebody that knows the VA system that can sit there and say, no, this is incorrect. They should have rated this percentage because he falls under this or she falls under that because of the 38 CFR, yada, yada, yada. So I'm guessing from the copious amount of letters and appeals and so on and so forth that I've sent on my own behalf, that I'm probably not in their top 3 favorites of somebody they would want to become an agent, because then they're up against somebody that knows the system and knows the garbage that they try to impart upon veterans' claims. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. But it further shows that, I look at it as...
I can't stand them. It's so wrong.
Exactly.
What they're doing.
And I can't help thinking that if they're doing this to me, how many other people are just like me that they're doing this to? And why aren't they speaking out? And the big thing is...
they commit suicide, because they get to a point where they're so helpless that they feel like they don't have a choice.
Exactly. And they're looking for any level of relief, and that's sad. There's lots of people that are coming out saying, I have a friend of mine that just committed suicide, but you didn't see it in the headlines. So that further gives the veterans the air of, well, what difference does it make? They don't care. Nobody cares. And nobody cares because it's not hitting the headlines, because all the media is too focused on trying to call out everything the president's doing, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And they're trying to call it all out, while watchdogs, who are the ones that I watch, so I keep an eye on all the watchdogs, because they're 90% more likely to actually publish vital information of what's going on, who's doing what, and put the facts in there, and that's why I watch the watchdogs instead of watching the news. I DVR everything. I don't watch TV. I definitely can't watch any of the news. And I only track on social media things to see what sort of lies the politicians are spinning and what they're avoiding, because they sure enough tend to avoid subjects that deal with veterans. Because if they ever get exposed for not helping veterans, they'll never get reelected again, because, we still live in a patriotic country. However, if the citizens don't know what's going on to the whistleblowers and to the veterans, then it's a no-brainer. They're not even a blip on the radar. So everyone's just call it happy with ignorance, that their politician is doing everything that they promised them they'd be doing, when in reality they're not. So we'll see how that turns out. But Lisa, I'm going to tell you that I'm very proud of you for coming forward and actually allowing me. I feel very privileged that you trust me enough with your story to help get this word out, because it is important, and it's a shame at how you had to overcome all of this just to retain some sort of normalcy in your life. But it's still like a dark cloud that's going to loom over us, because you're never going to forget it. And hopefully that keeps warning signs up, to look for other blips on the radar when it comes to the VA. But it's a shame that when somebody tried to do the right thing, the VA hammers you and then retaliates and abuses you to the point where it's just easier just to step away and try to end that nightmare than it is to keep battling against an enemy that you don't even know which direction it's coming from. You just know it's a very large entity that is able to keep doing and putting the pressure on you.
The Bible says we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and high places.
Absolutely.
So the only way, again, I say that for this to be resolved is doing exactly what you're doing today.
Well, I appreciate it, and I hold my responsibility in high regard for sure. And that's why I always try to make sure that everybody knows that they can be anonymous with their story. And I make it a point to delete everything that I receive, so that way there is no way I'll have any sort of information that will pinpoint anybody that I talk to. In the event somebody decides they want to try to sequester my information, well, they can have my hard drive, because it's not going to have anything on it. Lisa, thank you again. Thank you so much. I wish you all the best. I really do. You have yourself...
I wish you all the best also. And I don't trust easily, and for some reason I trust you.
Awesome.
And it's a really, really good feeling. I want to say one other thing is that the VA made it, I got to thinking that they just didn't think that I was good enough, regardless of the schooling that I said that I had, and when they replaced me, with someone, it was almost like they were they were doing something racist.
Right.
And that's what my case, the attorney filed the case on that, but it's deeper than that. So the court says, oh, we'll hear the discrimination part. The VA says, we'll hear the discrimination part, but we're not going to hear the whistleblower part. So that's why it's still in there.
See, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Everything needs to be in there.
Yeah, because it's about the vets.
Yep.
It's not really about it's about the discrimination because it wouldn't have happened, if
Right.
they didn't discriminate. But because it did happen, they need to know what happened because that happened.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, they can't hide behind what they think is a lesser charge.
Yeah.
So one thing about me is I do not like bullies, and I do my point to make sure that all parties concerned know that the bullying stops now.
Yeah.
So I'm
For sure.
very proud of you, Lisa, and I'm very humbled that you put your trust in me. I truly am, and I will do my best to make sure that our stories get out there and that this abuse stops now. If you have any updates or if things happen and you want to have another conversation on an interview or not on an interview, it doesn't matter. You reach out and we will coordinate. That sound good?
That sounds amazing. Thank you for being such an amazing man.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it.
Okay.
You just made my day.
You made mine.
You have yourself a great day.
Today. All right.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I don't know if people truly understand the level of guts that it takes for somebody to step forward knowing that they were abused in the past and that the VA is not going to try to do good things in the future with them, that they have the guts enough because it's the right thing to do, that they didn't do something wrong. They stepped forward and said, hey, all these veterans run the possibility, over 10,000 veterans run the possibility of possibly having HIV, AIDS, or hepatitis B and C because of instruments not being sanitized the correct way and still being used, or subpar items being used, as Lisa just said, with like heart surgery, implants. It's baffling to me that anybody in the medical profession would ever look at any of these items and still use them. However, in her profession, she was in the operating room and she was able to identify, hey, we have a problem and veterans can die because of this. In a minimum, they can get very, very sick and have a sickness that'll last them a lifetime. And she steps forward and tries to put a stop to it, tries to bring light to it, and everybody drags their feet. Nobody takes it seriously. Instead, they retaliate to get her to ultimately leave. And how do they do that? By isolating her, removing her off of the team, then removing her off of emails, and then convincing the coworkers not to talk to her. And if they did talk to her, I'm sure it was very short conversations. And we tend to try to click with people that we work with, have a connection with people at work, and we expect them to have our backs when it's needed. But when the VA can put their thumb down on you nice and hard and say, you could lose your job, or we could come after you and have to remove your position entirely, which means now you don't have a position to go to, then people tend to think to themselves, I really need this job and it really doesn't concern me, so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and keep driving forward. So, bravo to Lisa and to everyone else that I'm interviewing, because it takes a lot of guts for them to step forward and actually put their story out there. It takes a lot of guts for them to do that. So I am very humbled that she trusts me that much to handle her story and get it published. And I definitely am humbled, and I'm very happy to be able to give her the platform to tell her story. With that being said, this is As1Voice, and hopefully anybody that listens to this passes this on to their veterans friends. And the only time we're going to put a stop to this is when we can get organized and get our stories out there. Other veterans can benefit from your story. If you went to a bad VA, if you went to a good VA, I don't want to just hear the bad stories. If you got a good VA story and you're a veteran, then I'd love to hear that. I'd love to interview you to be able to get your story, because I can put that on the books of, hey, at this VA, he had a really good, or she had a really good provider and the hospital bent over backwards for him. And, those are the stories I want to hear as well. It's not just the bad stories, so I'd like to hear success stories as well. Unfortunately, too many veterans decide that they don't want to put their story out there because they can get targeted as well. So I'm a firm believer, if you can do something to better the situation for somebody else, why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you do it? I mean, even if you just want to send me an email, as1voice@hotmail.com, send me an email and tell your story, and I'll read that story on a podcast. That way the information can still get out. You can create a account on Hotmail and you can send me the information. Keep the information as far as keeping it clean. Try not to name drop unless it's absolutely necessary. But I would prefer that you did not name drop, because by name dropping, then you run the chance of retaliation. And I certainly have enough on my plate that I don't need to worry about anyone else coming after me. So if you would, send me an email, write your story down, doesn't matter, but spread the word. At a bare minimum, this is what you can do to help other veterans. Pass this information along and let them know that there's an outlet for them to tell their story. Thank you for listening. Appreciate your time. Be safe.